Hello, this is Everett Rowden here with,
Colin.
and welcome back to Uranium's Strongest Soldiers. In this video, in this podcast, we would like to be talking about previous disasters that have occurred from the result of nuclear, we'll call it power, and how they could be avoided / why there's such a negative public perception of them.
Why people cower and scream in fear when they hear the term nuclear power. Things like Chernobyl, Fukushima.
Yep.
There's this one Japanese accident, Tokaimura. But we'll go over that.
Yeah, let's start with. Well, I want to start with Chernobyl personally. I believe that's what most people know about and think about when they think about nuclear disasters.
Yeah, there are video games based on it.
Yeah, it's very popular, and so I'll just kind of start with what happened at Chernobyl.
Yeah.
How did it end up disrupting? And so the main thing that people view when they think of Chernobyl is the plant broke down and it erupted. It caused a bunch of environmental damage. It killed people. People were getting radiation poisoning. It's now a safe area to live in, but it was uninhabitable for many years. And where this stems from is, well, it's multiple issues. The first being there was a flawed reactor design. There were very minimal regulations in place when this was being built. And then on top of that, the people and the lawmakers that were the ones in charge of making these laws, they wanted to push out Chernobyl as fast as they could in order to get high energy production. And so they ignored a bunch of known safety regulations and were forcing people to use bad parts, and they had the workers kind of off schedule doing incorrect procedures and testing. All of this was an accumulation of kind of what led to the breakdown of Chernobyl.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a little fast timeline. So they tried to do a test. April 25th, 1986. They tried to do a test. They is supposed to determine in the event of a power failure, the plant still spinning turbines can produce enough electricity to keep coolant pumps running during the brief gap before the emergency generators kick in. So the safety test is what destroys everything. So the cooling system is disabled to keep it from interfering. So they shut down. They can begin the test. The test begins. Power surge occurs. Then there's an explosion. The control rods jam. So it blows an 1,000-ton roof off the reactor and shoots a fireball. And then the blackout happens. Radiation everywhere. Firefighters arrive.
By the blackout, we mean fire and smoke covering the sky, filled with radiation, just damaging everything it comes across.
Complete meltdown. People don't understand the severity of it, and many people get cancer, sick.
There's a large number of amputees and just physically disabled people as a result of the Chernobyl accident.
Yeah.
And so, again, like we were saying, this was mainly just a lack of oversight. The people that were running the tests were not running them correctly, and this were due to just lousy regulations given from higher ups.
Yeah.
And so the next incident I'd probably want to go to would be Fukushima in Japan. And I'm going to look up a year real quick because it's not on the top of my head.
Yeah.
So this was in 2011. Fukushima happened. Fukushima was a perfectly running reactor. There was actually nothing going wrong with it. However, it was by the coast. Japan is known for its earthquakes. And so Japan had a big earthquake in 2011, which caused a tsunami. Now, the tsunami came on shore and destroyed much of the nuclear power plant. This itself would have been fine except for one thing, in that their cooling systems were susceptible to this. And so the tsunami came in and destroyed all of the cooling systems at Fukushima, which then was causing the reactors to overheat and melt rods, indicating that a hydrogen explosion would happen, which did happen.
Yeah, and thankfully only one death occurred, and that was 4 years later, suspected to be from the radiation, but there were injuries, leukemia.
And so even on a direct comparison in terms of damage control, both of these are horrible incidents. It's a shame that they happened. However, in 2011, Fukushima was essentially the victim of a natural disaster that realistically, it might have been able to have been planned for, but it's a very understandable that this might have been something that didn't occur to them, this very specific set of circumstances.
Yes.
One, we've learned from that. As I was saying in the first video, U.S. laws require that nuclear reactors be able to withstand an earthquake right now.
Yeah.
The second thing is that death-wise, comparatively, even in 2011, they were not prepared for this to happen. They were not ready for a nuclear plant shutdown. 1 death.
Yeah.
Compared to Chernobyl, which was hundreds, if not thousands, I believe,
yeah,
that is a major improvement.
4 years later, even. But the partial reason why this might have been better contained was because they had experienced a previous nuclear meltdown incident. And this was in 1997 from the Tokaimuda power plant. They were so in 1988 it was commissioned, and it was commissioned and operated by the JCO. So the JCO gets this built. They do what is known as a wet process. Instead of having nuclear fuel rods, the nuclear fuel is just basically dissolved into nitric acid in a dissolution tank. Then it's transferred into the tank, so it's liquid instead of the solid fuel rods with the pellets. So, okay, there were 2 of them basically. One was more costly than the other. So the second one, March 1997, and September 1999. My apologies. So they enriched uranium to 18.8% to U-235, and this was an experimental reactor that they were using. So basically, what happens? They're supposed to put it in a dissolution tank, and then that transfers into the pool. And they decided that basically safety regulations, they just got lax. Yeah. The employees, instead of putting it into the dissolution tank where it's supposed to go, they just put it in a steel bucket. And they go from putting it in a steel bucket to putting it directly into the tank. And because they put it directly into the tank, it mixed with all the other uranium that was still in there, and basically caused an unlimited chain reaction, floods the place with radiation, and people saw a red light up, and they realized that they were dead without even feeling the effects yet. It was insane. It was insane mismanagement. The government tried to cover it up, but they were unsuccessful. And it's just kind of dark. It's kind of a example of them trying to not admit their mistakes and admit they weren't paying attention. But it's a tragedy, but I'm glad to see that the Japanese government learned from it.
And there's even, I would argue, a very similar incident that happened in the United Kingdom in Windscale, where, not in exact steps, but in the same general sense, the government was pushing just speed in production over the safety of its employees. And then, again, there was a big meltdown within the reactor, and the government was just trying to brush away all responsibility. This seems to be sort of a theme that kind of happens with the production of nuclear power plants.
Mismanagement.
And so the last incident I think we should kind of brush up on would be in America, 3 Mile Island, which was in 1979 in Pennsylvania.
One of those ones that is contained and isn't quite as destructive. And it's an example of why it shouldn't be so scary for us to have more nuclear power plants or more reliance on nuclear power.
3 Mile Island. So after we'll talk about specifically why there was a reactor breakdown, but what happened in terms of effects, almost nothing. They had to shut down the reactor. There were 0 injuries, 0 susceptible radiation poisonings, and 0 deaths that were a result of 3 Mile Island. They shut the reactor down. I believe actually recently, as of this month, they are planning to reopen the 3 Mile Island reactor. Privately, not for a government. I believe it's Amazon is, or Google's using it for AI, something like that. One of the big companies.
Yeah, because it requires a lot of power.
Yeah, but they are reopening the 3 Mile Island plant, and so it really does make you consider. Well, it broke down. There were no really negative effects that were a result of it, and it's able to be reopened. Could we not follow this model for, or even just adjust to why it broke down and follow that model for, a almost centralized grid-wise nuclear power plant?
3 Mile Island, it's part of the reason why construction costs rose and why we mentioned previously that these companies don't want to create them and they instead go to fossil fuels, but because of its like less negatively impacting just the characteristics of this incident, I think we should relax. I think we should just realize that it's possible to have an accident without a catastrophic failure.
Yeah, I think it should be a really big learning point for us, and I personally think it should have been the pivot, not to a main-based nuclear energy system, but I think it should have been a pivot of public opinion. I can understand that there was an accident, and so there might have been this negative connotation that came out in news and headlines and articles. However, at the end of the day, between Chernobyl, between Nagasaki, between Fukushima, 3 Mile Island wasn't, or I shouldn't say Fukushima, that was after, compared to Tokaimura, 3 Mile Island was non-catastrophic at all. And because of it, understandably, like we were saying, the construction costs ramped up. And so if we were to look at that today, back then, using today's numbers accounted for inflation, a power plant would cost an overnight cost, which means assuming there's no delays, everything is just, it's construction materials, how much you're paying the employees, and that's pretty much it. So overnight costs, on paper, how much it would be to build. Accounting for inflation, in 1979, it was somewhere around a little less than $1 billion, maybe $1 billion. Today, we're at roughly $6 to $8 billion per power plant in overnight costs. Now, adjusting for inflation, that's way too much.
Yeah.
We're looking at 6, 7, 8 times what we had to pay back in the day. But that's not how much a power plant actually costs. And so when you go look at the average overall cost of a power plant, there's 6 to 8 billion overnight. The average power plant takes 4 to 5 years to build. Well, that's on paper. When we go look at the actuality of it, they take 10 to 12 years to build after regulations and changing safety concerns. And every time there's a new safety rule that comes in, they have to remodel a new part, which could cause them to rebuild the whole thing. The average in the last 5 years, the average power plant has cost around $30 billion to build.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot. But like I was saying earlier, when we look at, say, how much the US subsidizes in oil, we could pull out 10% of that number, and all of a sudden we can build 2 to 3 nuclear power plants, right? And so I think it's not a matter of, oh, it's too expensive, all of this. I think it's a matter of we're not shifting our money correctly. We're using it as a tool, and it's not publicly recognized that nuclear energy is used as a political tool. Because when you really look at it, neither side of politicians they've released acts. So in 2018, Biden released an act pledging to further nuclear energy research. But again, under Biden, we didn't exceed $1.5 billion in nuclear funding, and we were subsidizing almost $1 trillion in oil. So it's a really weird thing. And then with Trump just being elected, he had this plan to, again, like he plans to get nuclear energy as a basis all around the U.S. But he just went and named the current president of Big Oil, who, like I said, received $4 trillion in profits last year. Trump just named that guy our current head of the Department of Energy. Now, I don't want to call conflict of interest or anything, but why is the head of a private oil company the head of all of the United States Department of Energy?
Yeah.
And so realistically, I would say there's no almost hope or future for the way that nuclear energy is going in the United States unless we make radical changes
Yeah,
in
so-
how we view it.
We'll round off. Thank you for listening.
Yep.